She lied to my face. I had spent years interrogating criminals, reading the micro-expressions of liars who thought they could outsmart the law. I'd seen men fold under pressure, seen women spin stories so elaborate they almost fooled themselves. But this was different. Because this time, the suspect wasn't some stranger in an interrogation room. It was my wife. It all started with a case, one that should have been routine. A high-profile robbery in the city, the kind of job that reeked of precision and planning. The department was already on edge, pressure mounting from the higher-ups to make an arrest. And then we got a lead. A suspect, Greg Turner, seen leaving the scene on security footage. I was assigned to the case, ready to do what I did best. Hunt him down, break him down, and close the file. But then, the unexpected happened. Greg had an alibi. My wife, Emily. I had been sitting in the precinct, reviewing the case files when I first saw her name in the report. My breath hitched, a slow, creeping unease slithering down my spine. I read the statement twice, then 3 times, my mind refusing to process it. According to her, Greg Turner had been with her that night. He wasn't committing a crime. He was at a dinner party, with her. The words blurred on the page as my stomach twisted into knots. The implications were immediate, brutal. Why was my wife, my Emily, providing an alibi for a man I had never even heard her mention? A man under investigation? I knew I couldn't react, at least, not yet. My years as a detective had trained me to remain composed, to compartmentalize. But this wasn't just another case. This was my life unraveling right in front of me. That night, I came home as if nothing had changed. Emily greeted me with her usual smile, pressing a soft kiss to my cheek, asking how my day had been. The scent of vanilla and jasmine clung to her skin, the same perfume she always wore. She looked exactly the same. And yet, everything felt different. I played along. I told her about work, laughed at her stories, held her in my arms. But my mind was elsewhere, rewinding every interaction, analyzing every detail. Had she always been this good at lying? Had I simply been blind to it all these years? Lying beside her in bed that night, listening to her steady breathing, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Greg Turner was a criminal, and Emily was his alibi. I didn't know what was worse, that she was involved with him in some way, or that she thought she could lie to me and get away with it. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that I was already investigating her. I couldn't sleep that night. The steady rhythm of Emily's breathing beside me felt like a slow, mocking reminder of how easily she had lied, how naturally the deception had come to her. I had built my career on detecting falsehoods, on dismantling stories piece by piece until the truth was all that remained. And yet, my own wife, my Emily, had slipped one right under my nose. Or maybe I had simply refused to see it. By morning, my mind was clear. I had no choice but to investigate her. I started with the basics. I pulled up Greg Turner's file, combing through every detail we had on him. 37 years old. A history of small-time scams before escalating to high-stakes robberies. No wife. No kids. Just a long string of aliases and connections to the underworld. And then I found something that made my stomach turn. Emily's name wasn't just in the case file as his alibi. It was in his phone records. 3 calls. 1 late at night. 2 in the early morning. I leaned back in my chair, gripping my coffee so tightly I nearly cracked the mug. My wife had been speaking to a known criminal. And not just once. This wasn't a coincidence. I needed more. More than just calls, more than just gut instinct. I needed undeniable proof of whatever was going on between them. That night, I kept my routine normal. I kissed Emily when I walked through the door, let her talk about her day, let her laugh and touch me like everything was fine. But as she drifted off to sleep, I got up. I moved quietly, years of detective work making me light on my feet. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down. Locked, of course, but I knew her passcode. I had never invaded her privacy before. Never even thought to. But now, my hands moved with certainty as I unlocked the screen. Messages. I scrolled quickly, heart pounding. Then I saw it. Greg Turner. A name that didn't belong in her contacts. A conversation that shouldn't exist. Emily, I can't talk now. Later. Greg. You sure he doesn't suspect anything? Emily. No. He trusts me. The words were a punch to the gut. I put the phone back, my hands shaking. Emily was lying to me, and she was protecting him. This wasn't just an affair. This was something bigger, something dangerous. I had to know everything, because the next time she lied to my face, I would be ready, and she wouldn't see it coming. I sat at the precinct the next morning, staring at my desk but seeing nothing. The words from Emily's messages looped in my head like a bad recording. No, he trusts me. She had been talking about me. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. I had spent years tracking criminals, exposing lies, uncovering the filth people tried to bury. But I had never imagined that the biggest betrayal I'd face would come from the woman I had vowed to spend my life with. I needed answers, and I knew exactly how to get them. That evening, I played the role of the unsuspecting husband. Emily was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming softly as she stirred something on the stove. She looked up and smiled, that same warm, familiar smile I had fallen for all those years ago. "Hey, you," she said, leaning up to kiss me. "Long day?" I forced a chuckle. "You have no idea." I moved behind her, wrapping my arms around her waist, pressing a slow kiss to her neck. I felt her relax into me, her body melting against mine. "Missed you today," she murmured. I swallowed the bitterness that rose in my throat. "How was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Oh, you know," she said, stirring the pot again. "Work, errands, the usual." Lies. I knew where she had been today. I had checked her location before coming home. She hadn't been running errands. She had been in a part of town she had no reason to be in. A cheap apartment complex on the east side. Greg Turner's last known residence. I let my hands slide from her waist, stepping back as if I hadn't just caught her in another lie. "Sounds like a boring day." She turned, smirking. "Not all of us get to chase criminals for a living." "No," I thought. "Some of us just protect them." Later that night, as Emily showered, I went back to her phone. This time, I took screenshots of her messages with Greg and sent them to my own phone. Evidence. Then I did something I had never done before. I followed her. The next morning, I told her I had an early meeting and left the house before dawn. But I didn't go to the precinct. I parked 2 blocks away and waited. At exactly 9:45 a.m., she left the house. Her hair was done, her makeup flawless. Not the way she looked when she was running errands. She drove across town, and I stayed far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her pull into a parking lot and step out of the car. She wasn't alone for long. Greg Turner emerged from the building, a cocky grin on his face. He leaned against her car as she approached him, his hands slipping to her waist with a familiarity that made my blood boil. And then she kissed him. It wasn't a friendly peck. It wasn't hesitation. It was passion. It was betrayal. I gripped the steering wheel, my vision tunneling. This wasn't just an affair. This was my wife helping a criminal evade the law. And now, I had proof. I took a slow, steady breath, forcing myself to think clearly. Emily didn't know I was watching. She still believed I was in the dark. That meant I had the advantage, and I was going to use it. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The image of Emily pressed against Greg Turner burned into my brain. A slow, searing pain that refused to dull. I had spent years believing I knew my wife, trusting her without question. And now? Now, I was staring at a version of her I didn't recognize. A woman capable of deceit. A woman capable of betraying me, not just as a husband, but as a detective. Because this wasn't just infidelity. This was a crime. Emily wasn't just lying to me. She was protecting him, and I needed to know why. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I let the truth simmer beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I moved carefully, methodically, just like I would with any other suspect. I accessed her phone records through my department's database. It wasn't exactly legal, but at this point, neither was she. The results hit me like a gut punch. Emily and Greg had been in contact for over a year. Hundreds of calls. Thousands of texts. She hadn't just been lying to me for a few months. She had been living a double life for over a year. A cold, hard rage settled into my chest. But even that wasn't the worst part. One text thread stood out, buried deep in her deleted messages, recovered by a simple forensic tool I had used countless times in investigations. Greg, you sure you can do this? Emily, I have to. It's the only way to keep him from finding out. Greg, if he does? Emily, then we're both dead. My breath caught. What the hell was she talking about? Was she afraid of me? Did she think I would hurt her if I found out? Or, my stomach twisted. Had she gotten herself tangled in something bigger than an affair? I was no longer just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with a secret that could get her killed. The next day, I followed her again. She wasn't careful. She didn't even check her surroundings as she pulled up to a rundown apartment complex. I parked a block away and moved on foot, staying out of sight. She knocked twice on the door. It opened immediately. Greg. I could see them through the crack of the window blinds. Emily pacing, agitated, Greg standing close, his hands on her arms, calming her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't kissing him. She was terrified. I pulled out my phone and hit record, capturing every movement, every frantic gesture, every look of fear that crossed her face. This wasn't love. This wasn't romance. This was desperation. Emily wasn't just protecting Greg. She was trapped. And suddenly, the game changed. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to find out exactly what she was hiding. And then, I was going to make them both pay. One way or another. I drove back to the precinct in silence, the weight of what I had seen pressing down on me like a vice. Emily wasn't just cheating. She was scared. But of what? Or worse, who? I had spent the past 24 hours convinced she was a liar, a manipulator. But now, I was beginning to see something different, something darker. She wasn't just betraying me. She was in danger. And whether I hated her or not, I needed to know why. That night, I played the part of the unsuspecting husband. Dinner was quiet, filled with the usual small talk. I watched her closely, studying every detail. The way she twirled her fork in her pasta without eating. The way her eyes flickered toward the clock, as if waiting for something. Or someone. She was nervous. Distracted. She didn't know I had seen her with Greg. Didn't know I had read her messages. Didn't know I had the advantage. I needed to keep it that way. Everything okay? I asked, feigning concern. Emily looked up, startled. What? You seem off, I said, tilting my head. Something on your mind? She hesitated, then forced a smile. Just tired. Lies. But I nodded, pretending to believe her, because I had already set the trap. At 10 p.m., I kissed her goodnight and pretended to go to sleep. At 10:45, she left the bedroom. At 10:50, I heard the front door close. I was out of bed in seconds, moving quickly but quietly. I peered through the blinds just in time to see her taillights disappearing down the street. I grabbed my keys and followed. She drove across town, same as before. But this time, she didn't go to Greg's apartment. She went downtown, to a warehouse near the docks. I parked far enough away to stay out of sight and slipped into the shadows. My heart pounded as I watched her step out of the car and approach the entrance. The building was old, rusted metal and shattered windows. A place that screamed illegal business. A man was waiting for her. Not Greg. Someone worse. Even from a distance, I recognized him. Luca Moretti. A name that sent alarms blaring in my mind. Luca was a fixer for the criminal underworld. The kind of man who made problems disappear. If Emily was meeting with him, it meant one thing. She was in over her head. And she was running out of time. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw the way she clutched her arms, her posture tense. She was pleading. Moretti barely moved, listening with an unreadable expression. Then, he grabbed her wrist. She flinched, trying to pull away. He held her there for just a second longer than necessary, then let go. Emily stumbled back, shaking. Moretti said something. Then he walked inside, leaving her standing there, breathless and terrified. I clenched my fists. This wasn't just an affair. This was a debt, and I needed to find out what the hell my wife had gotten herself into. Before it was too late, I stayed hidden as Emily hurried back to her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the keys. She sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead like she was trying to collect herself. She was unraveling. Good. Because the more fragile she became, the more likely she was to slip up. As she finally pulled away from the docks, I didn't follow. I had what I needed for now. Instead, I turned my attention back to the warehouse. Luca Moretti. This changed everything. Moretti wasn't just another criminal. He was the guy criminals feared, the kind of man who didn't do favors, only transactions. If Emily was meeting with him, it meant she owed him something. Or worse, Greg did. And now, I had the missing piece of the puzzle. Emily wasn't covering for Greg because she loved him. She was covering for him because she was trapped. I spent the next day putting my plan into motion. First, I dug into Moretti. He was clean, too clean. A man with that kind of power should have had a record, but he was a ghost. No bank accounts, no properties, no digital footprint except for whispers in confidential files. But I knew how men like him worked. They dealt in secrets and debts, and they always had something to lose. So I set a trap. That night, I told Emily I had an out-of-town case. She barely reacted, just nodded, gave me a distracted kiss, and said, "Be safe." She didn't know it was a test. An hour later, as I sat in my car down the street, I watched the house. At exactly 10:30 p.m., she left. Not to meet Greg, not to meet Moretti, but to go somewhere new. A safe deposit box. I followed her inside, keeping my distance, watching as she signed in at the front desk. She didn't see me. She was too focused, too nervous. The moment she disappeared into the back room, I made my move. Flashing my badge, I approached the teller. "Detective Daniel Lawson, Major Crimes. I need access to the security feeds now." The man hesitated, but one look at my expression and he obeyed. The footage loaded, grainy black and white. I watched Emily open the box and pull out a thick envelope. She hesitated, then took a deep breath and removed its contents. Photos. Stacks of them. I leaned in, my pulse hammering. The camera didn't show details, but I could make out faces. A man in a suit, another in a club, a third exchanging money in an alley. This wasn't just blackmail. This was insurance. Emily had leverage. On Moretti? On Greg? On someone else entirely? I had no idea, but I knew one thing for sure. She had been lying to everyone, including him. And if Moretti found out, she was already dead. I stepped back from the monitor, mind racing. Emily wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just covering for Greg. She was playing both sides. And I was done playing the fool. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I never thought I'd call. "Yeah?" came the gruff voice on the other end. "Detective Lawson," I said. "I need a favor." I took a deep breath, knowing there was no turning back. I need eyes on my wife. Because the next time she tried to lie to me, I would be 2 steps ahead. I barely slept that night. The sting of Emily's lies wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional. I wasn't just a husband unraveling the truth. I was a detective tracking a suspect, laying a trap she wouldn't see coming. And now, I had help. By morning, I had a team in place. I couldn't officially put a tail on Emily, not without revealing my hand. So I reached out to an old friend, someone who didn't ask questions. A former undercover cop turned private investigator. Someone who specialized in digging up dirt on people who thought they had covered their tracks. Within hours, I had a live feed of Emily's movements. Her car, her calls, her meetings. All I had to do was wait. At 8:15 p.m., she left the house. She thought I was still out of town. Perfect. I sat in my car a few blocks away, watching the live stream from the hidden tracker my guy had planted under her dashboard. She drove straight to the east side, past the rundown apartments where Greg had been hiding, past the docks where she had met Moretti. She was heading somewhere new. A hotel? The camera feed from the parking lot showed her stepping out of the car, her head on a swivel. She was checking for a tail. Smart, but not smart enough. She didn't know she was being watched from above. The rooftop camera of the hotel captured everything. At exactly 8:42 p.m., Greg Turner walked out of the lobby. He looked relaxed, smug, and then Emily ran to him, and she kissed him. Not just a hesitant brush of lips, not just a quick, guilty embrace. A deep, lingering kiss. The kind that twisted my stomach and made my vision blur with rage. I gripped the steering wheel, my heart hammering. I had suspected. I had feared. But now? Now, I knew. I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't going to confront them. Not yet. I was going to ruin them. Because if Emily thought she could make a fool out of me, if Greg thought he could take my wife and walk away unscathed, they had no idea what was coming. I downloaded the footage. Then I made a plan. A trap so perfectly laid that when I finally revealed the truth, it wouldn't just destroy them. It would leave them begging for mercy. The footage played on a loop in my mind, each second another twist of the knife. Emily, Greg, the hotel, the kiss. I had spent years solving crimes, catching criminals who thought they were untouchable. And now, the biggest case of my life was unraveling right in front of me. My own wife, my own home, my own betrayal. But I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to break dishes or demand answers. I was going to be patient. And then, I was going to bury them both. I spent the next day preparing. Every piece of evidence, every text, every phone call, every meeting, every kiss. I compiled it all. Photos, videos, bank statements. Then, I picked the perfect moment. Our anniversary. The day she thought I'd be away on business. The day she thought she'd be safe with him. I rented out a private lounge at the most upscale restaurant in town. I told Emily it was a surprise celebration, something special to make up for how distant I'd been lately. She took the bait, smiling at me like she wasn't sleeping with another man. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Or who. At 7 p.m., she walked into the restaurant, expecting a romantic dinner for two. Instead, she found everyone. Her parents, my parents, our closest friends, and Greg, sitting in the front row. Confusion flickered across her face. Then fear. She turned to me, her smile faltering. Daniel, what is this? I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. The projector behind me flickered to life. And then, the truth played for everyone to see. The footage of her sneaking into Greg's hotel room. The text where she promised she'd handle me. The secret meetings. The kiss. The room fell into stunned silence. And then, the whispers started. Her mother gasped. My father muttered a curse. Someone knocked over a glass. Emily went pale, her hands trembling as she looked at me, eyes wide in horror. Daniel. I raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't, I said coldly. Greg, the smug bastard, tried to stand up. Hey man, this. I turned to him, my voice calm, lethal. Sit down. He did. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Please let me explain. There's nothing to explain, I said. I just wanted everyone to see you for who you really are. She covered her mouth, shaking her head. Daniel, I didn't let her finish. I turned my back on her, walking toward the door. And just before I left, I said the words that sealed her fate. You and Greg deserve each other. Then I walked away, leaving her in the wreckage of her own lies. And I didn't look back. I walked out of that restaurant and didn't stop. Not when I heard Emily call my name. Not when I heard her mother sobbing. Not when Greg muttered something under his breath, too cowardly to stand up and face me. I left them all behind, because there was nothing left to say. The truth was out. And now, it was time for consequences. The next morning, Emily tried to call me. Then she tried again. And again. By noon, I had over 20 missed calls. By the afternoon, my lawyer had served her with divorce papers. She showed up at my precinct that evening, her eyes red and swollen, waiting for me outside. I almost ignored her. Almost. But I needed to hear her admit it. One last time. I stepped out of the precinct, stopping a few feet away from her. She looked at me like a woman on the verge of breaking, her hands shaking as she wiped her face. Daniel, please. Just talk to me. I folded my arms. Talk about what, Emily? She flinched at the coldness in my voice. I messed up, she whispered. I don't know why I did it. She took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. I love you, Daniel. I never stopped. I let out a slow breath, tilting my head as I studied her. You love me? Yes, she said quickly, hope flashing in her eyes. So that's why you slept with him? I asked, my voice eerily calm. Tears spilled over her cheeks. It wasn't just about him. It was, she choked on her words, pressing a hand to her mouth. I shook my head. Save it, Emily. I don't care why you did it. She grabbed my arm, desperate. But I do. I care. Please, Daniel, I will do anything to fix this. I looked down at her hand on my arm. Once, that touch had meant everything to me. Now, it meant nothing. I pried her fingers off and took a step back. You can't fix this. Her breath hitched. Daniel, please. I gave her one last look, one last moment to let reality sink in. Then I turned and walked away. And this time, I knew I wouldn't look back. Emily wasn't done. Even after I walked away, after I made it clear there was no coming back, she kept trying. Calls, texts, emails filled with desperate apologies. She begged to meet, begged to explain. I ignored every single one, because I wasn't just leaving her. I was making sure she lost everything. The divorce was swift and brutal. I had spent years providing for her, building our life, making sure she never had to worry about anything. Now, I made sure she had nothing. She had cheated, lied, broken the vows we made. So I took the house. I took the car. I took every dollar I legally could. And Greg vanished the second he realized Emily had nothing left to give. One moment, he was her secret lover. The next, he was gone. No calls, no messages, nothing. She had destroyed our marriage for him. And now, she had no one. The last time I saw Emily, she was moving out of our house. Correction, my house. Her once perfect hair was a mess, her hands shaking as she carried out the last of her things. She saw me standing by the door and stopped, eyes wide and pleading. Daniel. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. I told you, you and Greg deserve each other. A broken laugh slipped from her lips. Greg? He's gone, Daniel. He never really cared, did he? I said nothing. She swallowed hard, stepping closer. You were right. I ruined everything. I lost you. I nodded, unaffected. Yeah, you did. Her face crumpled. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her. This wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. This was a stranger, a liar, a cheater, someone who had taken everything we had and burned it to the ground. I smiled faintly. No, Emily, I won't. Then I turned around and walked inside, closing the door behind me. For good. The silence after Emily left was deafening. No more footsteps in the hallway. No more perfume lingering in the bedroom. No more lies, no more betrayals. Just me. For the first time in years, I was alone. And I welcomed it. The precinct felt different after everything. Colleagues who had once envied my perfect marriage now gave me looks of pity. Some tried to comfort me. Others whispered behind my back. I didn't care. I buried myself in work, chasing criminals, closing cases, restoring order, everywhere except my own life. Until her. Her name was Lauren. She wasn't like Emily. Lauren was sharp, independent. Someone who didn't need saving. She worked as a criminal psychologist, consulting with law enforcement. Our paths crossed on a case, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than rage. She challenged me, called me out on my sarcasm, matched my wit with her own. She made me laugh, and I had forgotten how good that felt. One night, after a long case, we ended up at a quiet bar. She sipped her drink, watching me over the rim of her glass. You ever gonna tell me what really happened with your wife? I exhaled slowly. You already know the story. Yeah. She smirked. But I want your version. I swirled my whiskey, choosing my words carefully. She lied. She cheated. I made sure she lost everything. I took a slow sip. End of story. Lauren studied me, tilting her head. And yet, you still talk like you're waiting for something. I frowned. Waiting for what? She leaned in slightly, voice softer. Closure. I held her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel anger when I thought about Emily. Just nothing. Maybe that was closure. Or maybe it was just the beginning of something new. Weeks passed. Then months. Emily became nothing more than a ghost in my past. Her calls stopped. Her desperate texts faded into silence. She had lost, and I had won. Or so I thought. One evening, as I was leaving the precinct, I saw her. She was waiting by my car, arms crossed, looking thinner, paler. She wasn't the Emily I had once known, the polished, confident woman who could charm a room. No, this Emily was ruined. Good. I approached slowly, keeping my face unreadable. What do you want? Her lips parted like she was going to say something. Then she hesitated. Finally, she whispered, I needed to see you. I sighed, glancing at my watch. You saw me. Now go. She flinched. Daniel, please. I have nothing. Not my problem. Greg's gone, she continued, her voice shaking. Moretti came after him, after me. He owed money. A lot of it. And now, she stopped, swallowing hard. I don't know where to go. I tilted my head, feigning thoughtfulness. That's funny. I don't recall that being my problem. Tears welled in her eyes. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I threw everything away. I smirked. Yeah, you did. Her breath hitched, like she had held on to some pathetic hope that I would save her, that the man she had betrayed would still have some small part of his heart left for her. She was wrong. I stepped past her, unlocking my car door. Goodbye, Emily. She grabbed my wrist. Daniel. I turned, looking down at her one last time. You wanted Greg. You wanted that life. I shook my head. Now you have it. Enjoy. Then I got in my car, shut the door, and drove away. I didn't look back. Not this time. Not ever. The end. If you like this story, please like and subscribe to the channel.